If he hadn't pushed me, maybe I wouldn't have done what I did. That's what I keep telling myself. Anyway, not that it matters now. I'm Sergeant Anya Sharma, 27, and currently stuck in this sandpit of a country, counting down the days until I can go home and pretend none of this ever happened. I'm a combat medic, or at least I was before all this blew up. We're mid-deployment, obviously, stuck in some dusty forward operating base that smells like sweat and regret. And now the whole unit's under investigation, all because of him. It started subtly, like most things do, just little digs, little comments here and there from Staff Sergeant Miller. He was our squad leader, always had this air about him, like he knew everything, like he was doing us a favor just by existing. And his tone, it was always so condescending, especially with me. He'd say things like, "Sharma, are you sure you secured that bandage? Looks a bit loose. Wouldn't want a critical bleed. Now would we..." Or, if I made a suggestion during a training exercise, that's an idea. "Sharma, but let's stick to protocol. Shall we..." Always with that little smirk. Like he was barely tolerating my presence. I'm not saying I'm perfect. Nobody is, but I do my job. I'm good at it. I've saved lives, for crying out loud. And he just acted like I was some recruit fresh out of basic. It was infuriating. I tried to ignore it at first. Just let it roll off my back. That's what everyone says to do in the military, right? Don't let it get to you. But it did get to me. It burrowed under my skin. Every dismissive glance. Every sarcastic remark. It festered. One time, we were out on patrol, and a local kid tripped and scraped his knee pretty badly. Nothing major, but it was bleeding, and he was crying. I knelt down, pulled out my aid kit, and started cleaning it up. Miller walks over, looks down at me, and says, "Sharma, you're taking too long. We don't have all day for every scraped knee." Just like that, in front of everyone. The kid's parents were watching, and I just felt this flush of humiliation. I looked up at him, and he just had that same smug expression. I remember thinking, he just loves making me look small. I tried to talk to him about it. Once, I cornered him in the mess tent after dinner. Tried to be calm, reasonable. Staff Sergeant Miller, I started trying to keep my voice even. I just wanted to talk about some of our recent interactions. I feel like your tone can be a bit harsh sometimes, and it undermines my authority with the team. He just leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and stared at me with this blank look. My tone, "Sharma," he said, his voice flat. "My tone is professional. I'm ensuring our team maintains discipline and efficiency. Perhaps you're misinterpreting my directness?" "No, I'm not misinterpreting," I insisted, my voice rising a little despite my best efforts. "It feels personal, like you're singling me out." He scoffed. "Everyone gets the same treatment. Sharma, we're deployed, not on a vacation. If you can't handle constructive criticism, maybe this isn't the right place for you." Then he stood up and just walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling like a complete idiot. Like I was the problem for even bringing it up. That's when I realized he wasn't going to change. He was too arrogant, too convinced of his own superiority. It wasn't about my performance, it was about him wanting to assert dominance. And he chose me as his target. Why me? Maybe because I'm a woman. Maybe because I didn't immediately fall in line with his little alpha male routine. Who knows? All I know is he made my life a living hell. The tension just built after that. Every interaction felt like a battle. He'd make a comment. I'd glare. He'd give an order. I'd follow it to the letter, but with an unspoken defiance. I started keeping a mental log of every slight, every snide remark. It sounds petty, I know, but it was my way of coping, my way of proving to myself that I wasn't imagining it, that he really was targeting me. One particularly bad day. We were back at the FOB after a particularly grueling 24-hour patrol. Everyone was exhausted, dirty. Morale was low. Miller called us all together for a debrief. He started going over everything, pointing out every single mistake, no matter how minor, and of course, he spent an inordinate amount of time on my alleged errors. "Sharma, your pacing was off. You lagged behind at that last checkpoint, putting the team at risk." He barked, "And your radio checks were sloppy. Did you even confirm proper comms?" I'd been meticulous. I was always meticulous. Staff Sergeant. My pacing was adjusted to the terrain, and my radio checks were confirmed twice. I said, trying to stay calm. My hands were shaking, though I could feel the heat rising in my face. He just stared at me. "Don't contradict me. Sergeant, I observed your performance. It was subpar." That was it. That was the last straw. I felt something snap inside me. All the accumulated frustration, the humiliation, the constant invalidation. It just exploded. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice that much. But my words came out in a rush, sharp and venomous. Subpar. And you know what's subpar? Staff sergeant. Your leadership. You tear down your team. You undermine us. You create a hostile environment. Maybe if you weren't so busy trying to prove how tough you are, you'd actually lead us instead of just bullying us. The tent went silent. Everyone was staring. Miller's face went from angry to something else. Something I couldn't quite decipher. Shock. Maybe. He just stood there, mouth slightly open. I saw a few of the guys exchange glances. Private Ramirez, who always avoided conflict like the plague, looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. Sergeant Davis, who was usually pretty chill, just looked stunned. I walked out of that debrief without another word. I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't care. I felt a weird mix of terror and exhilaration. I'd finally said it. I'd finally stood up to him. I knew I was going to get called in. I just knew it. And I was right. First, it was our platoon sergeant. Sergeant First Class Jenkins. He's a by-the-book kind of guy. Always fair, but he doesn't tolerate insubordination. He called me into his office the next morning. Sergeant Sharma. What in the good God's name was that yesterday? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. He didn't look angry. Just disappointed? That's almost worse sometimes. I took a deep breath. Sergeant First Class. I just couldn't take it anymore. Staff Sergeant Miller has been consistently unprofessional, creating a hostile work environment. His tone, his constant undermining, it's affecting morale and unit cohesion. I laid it all out. Every incident I could remember, every time he'd made me feel small. I might have embellished a little, focused on his tone more than anything else. But it wasn't a lie. Not really. It was all true. From my perspective, Jenkins listened, nodding slowly. He took notes. When I finished, he just sat there for a moment, rubbing his chin. I understand your frustration, Sergeant, but publicly confronting a staff sergeant in a debrief is not the way to handle it. There are protocols, chains of command. I tried the protocols. Sergeant First Class, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I tried to talk to him directly. He dismissed me. He made it clear he wasn't going to change. What was I supposed to do? Just keep taking it. I could feel tears welling up. I didn't mean for them to. It just happened. My voice got shaky. I'm trying my best out here. You know, and to be constantly belittled, to have my professionalism questioned, it's exhausting. It makes me question myself. I let a few tears fall. It wasn't entirely faked. I was exhausted. I was frustrated. And maybe, just maybe, it helped my case a little. Jenkins looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. All right, Sergeant. I hear you. This is serious? I'll look into it. In the meantime, I need you to maintain professionalism. No more outbursts. Understood. I nodded, wiping my eyes. Understood. Sergeant First Class. He said he'd look into it, and I believed him. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe Miller would get a talking to. Maybe he'd be told to lay off. That's all I wanted. Just for him to back off and treat me like a professional. I didn't want him in trouble. Not real trouble. Except it wasn't the end of it. Not even close. A few days later, word started spreading like wildfire. Not just about my outburst, but about a formal complaint. Apparently, Jenkins had escalated it, which, in hindsight, I guess was inevitable. But I still thought it would be a quiet, internal thing. A stern word. A paper trail. Something like that. Instead, a team from higher command, an investigations unit, flew out to the FOB. Suddenly, everyone was being interviewed. Not just me, not just Miller, everyone. The whole squad, the whole platoon, even they were asking questions about Miller's leadership, his conduct, his interactions with everyone. Not just me. I heard snippets of conversations, whispers in the chow hall. Did you hear? Miller's getting reamed. They're interviewing everyone about his leadership style. I even heard some guys grumbling, what the hell is going on? Why is this such a big deal? I tried to keep a low profile. I told myself I'd done the right thing. He was a bully. Someone had to stand up to him. And now, finally, he was getting what he deserved. It was justice, right? But then I started to hear the other side of it. Not from Miller himself, obviously, but from the guys. Ramirez, for example, who used to always complain about Miller, suddenly became very quiet. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. I tried to talk to him once. Hey, Ramirez, you doing okay? He just mumbled. Yeah, fine, Sergeant Sharma, and walked away quickly. Even Davis, who I thought was on my side, seemed different. He'd nod curtly if I spoke to him, but he wouldn't engage in conversation. I knew what it was. They were worried. They were worried about the investigation. and they probably thought I was a snitch. I overheard a conversation between Davis and some other guy. I forget who, near the latrines. Davis was saying, I mean, yeah, Miller could be a dick, but an investigation, mid-deployment. It's just a distraction. We're out here trying to do our jobs, and now everyone's looking over their shoulder. And the other guy said, yeah. And it all started because of Sharma. Overtone? Seriously? We're in a war zone, and someone's complaining about tone? That stung. It stung badly. Overtone, that's how they saw it. Not about the constant belittling, the undermining, the hostile environment, just tone. Like I was some delicate flower who couldn't handle a stern word. They didn't get it. They didn't understand what it was like to be constantly under that kind of pressure, constantly feeling like you had to prove yourself just to exist. The investigation dragged on. Weeks turned into over a month. It felt like every other day. Someone was being pulled aside for another interview. Our operations started to slow down. The unit's focus wasn't on the mission anymore. It was on the investigation. You could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. No one really trusted anyone. Everyone was speculating. Miller himself became a ghost. He was still technically our squad leader, but he was barely there. He looked haggard, his eyes hollow. He avoided me like the plague, which was fine by me. I didn't want to see him either. But I saw the way the others looked at him. There was pity, sure, but also frustration. They knew this was because of me, and I knew they knew. One day, I was in the small recreation tent, trying to read a book, when I overheard a group of soldiers talking. They didn't notice me at first. I heard they might pull him from the field. One said, "No way." Another replied, "Mid-deployment? That's crazy. He's been out here for months. Good NCO." Two, "Even if he is a hothead sometimes." Yeah, but if this hostile work environment thing sticks. And apparently, there are other complaints now. Not just Sharma's. My ears perked up. Other complaints. I hadn't heard about that. I just assumed it was my complaint that had caused all this. Was Miller really that bad? Or were people just piling on because they saw an opportunity? Then one of them said, "I just hope this doesn't affect our rotation. I'm due to go home in 2 months. If this delays us," his voice trailed off, filled with worry. That's when it hit me. Really hit me. This wasn't just about Miller and me anymore. This was impacting everyone. Their morale, their mission, their chances of going home on time. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had just wanted him to stop being a jerk. I hadn't meant for it to escalate like this. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my fault. Miller had created the environment. He was the one who was hostile. I just reported it. I followed the rules. If the investigation found other things, that was on him. Not on me. But the uneasy feeling persisted. Then came the meeting. The big one. Everyone was called into the main briefing tent. The investigating officers were there. Along with our battalion commander, I sat in the back, trying to be invisible. Miller was up front, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. The commander started talking. He spoke about professionalism, about respect, about unit cohesion, and then he dropped the bomb. Due to the findings of the internal investigation, Staff Sergeant Miller has been relieved of his duties, effective immediately. He will be reassigned stateside pending further disciplinary action. A collective gasp went through the tent. I felt a jolt go through me. Relieved of duties. Reassigned stateside. That was huge. That was career ending. I hadn't wanted that. I really hadn't, just for him to be less of a jerk. The commander continued. Furthermore, due to the identified breakdowns in leadership and communication within this unit, operations will be temporarily curtailed. We will undergo a mandatory period of retraining and team-building exercises to address these issues. This will, unfortunately, impact our deployment schedule and subsequent rotation. There it was. The delay. The thing everyone had been dreading. The murmurs started, growing louder. I saw faces turn towards me. Not angry? Not yet. But something close to it. A quiet resentment. Specialist Chen, who was always meticulous about his rotation dates, looked directly at me, his face grim. Miller, meanwhile, just stood there, shoulders slumped. He didn't say a word. He just nodded when the commander finished, then turned and walked out of the tent, past all of us. No one said anything. No one stopped him. He just left. I felt a pang. A weird, uncomfortable feeling. He was ruined. His career. Probably, and it was because of me. All because of his tone. After that, the atmosphere on the phobie was colder than ever. The retraining was a joke. Everyone was going through the motions, resentful and silent. The resentment toward me was palpable. No one said anything directly. But the looks, the avoidance, the way conversation stopped when I walked by, it was all there. I was the one who'd messed things up. I was the one who'd gotten Miller removed. the one who delayed their rotations. I tried to justify it to myself. He brought it on himself. I tell myself in the privacy of my bunk. His actions led to this. I was just the catalyst, but it didn't feel right. It felt hollow. I even tried to talk to Davis again, to explain, look, I know it looks bad. I started trying to sound reasonable, but he was really making things impossible for me. I had to do something. Davis just looked at me with tired eyes. Anya, we're out here, risking our lives. We need to trust our leadership. We need to be a unit. This broke trust, and now everyone's paying for it. He didn't raise his voice, but his words were like a punch to the gut. Miller might have been tough, but he was our tough. Now we got nothing but an investigation hanging over our heads, and a delayed trip home. Overtone, Anya, over his tone. He shook his head and walked away. Overtone. That phrase, it haunted me. They just couldn't see it. They couldn't see the insidious way he'd worn me down. It wasn't just tone, it was emotional abuse. It was constant gaslighting. He would deny things he'd clearly said, rewrite events to make me look bad. He'd use my vulnerabilities against me, subtly bringing up past mistakes during arguments, just to throw me off balance. He'd make me feel like I was always wrong, always the one with the problem. But how do you explain that to a bunch of guys who just see tough leadership? They just saw a woman complaining about a man being direct. I started to withdraw. I ate alone. I kept to myself. The loneliness out here was already immense, but now it was compounded by this feeling of being an outcast. I'd made my bed. I suppose the new squad leader they assigned us was a temporary one, a young lieutenant who clearly wasn't ready for the role. He was nice, too nice, always asking if everyone was okay, trying to be accommodating. He avoided conflict, and it made things worse. Operations became even sloppier. Decisions were tentative. Everyone felt it. The unit was a mess. We were supposed to deploy to a new, more dangerous area of operations next month. The delays meant we'd be going later, potentially deeper into the hot season, and the overall mood was grim. No one wanted to be here longer than they had to, and I was the reason they were stuck. I started having nightmares, not about combat, not about injuries, but about the faces of the guys in my unit, staring at me with silent accusation. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I'd try to rationalize it. They'll get over it. When we get home, things will go back to normal. It's just temporary. But I knew it wasn't. This was permanent. Miller's career was ruined. Our unit's cohesion was shattered. And my reputation, well, that was gone too. They'd remember me as the one who brought down the house over nothing. The one who couldn't handle it. The one who made everyone's lives harder. I saw Miller one last time before he left. He was boarding a transport plane, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked even worse than before, gaunt and defeated. He saw me standing there, watching him. Our eyes met for a brief second. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusation, just emptiness, a kind of resigned defeat. It was unsettling. I almost went to say something, anything, but I couldn't. My throat closed up. He just turned and walked onto the plane, and then he was gone. The investigation finally wrapped up. Officially, the findings stated that Staff Sergeant Miller was indeed found to have engaged in conduct unbecoming of an NCO, contributing to a hostile work environment and undermining unit morale. It also cited a general breakdown in communication within the unit that required immediate attention. It was vague enough that it didn't explicitly blame me, but everyone knew. Miller was honorably discharged, but not without a black mark on his record that would follow him forever. No more promotions, no more leadership roles. His military career, which he had dedicated his life to, was over, and me, I wasn't officially punished. I didn't get a formal reprimand, but the informal punishment was far worse. I was isolated. When we finally rotated home, months later than planned, it was like I was invisible. No one invited me to the typical welcome home gatherings. No one called to check in. My phone stayed silent. I tried reaching out to a few people just to see how they were doing. Ramirez, Davis, Chen. None of them responded to my texts or calls. It was a complete blackout. I'd see them sometimes in passing on base, and they just looked straight through me. It was like I didn't exist. My own career stagnated. I was passed over for promotions, even for routine training opportunities. Every time I applied for a new position, I'd get an interview, and the conversation would inevitably drift to team dynamics and handling conflict. I knew they were looking at my record, at the vague, coded language about the investigation. I was branded. I moved into a small apartment off base, alone. I used to imagine getting back, reconnecting with my military family, having them understand, but they didn't. They never would. They saw me as the person who selfishly blew up their lives, their careers, their time away from home, all because of something as trivial as tone. Sometimes late at night. I still think about it. I replay the conversations, the looks, the way Miller just slumped. I try to find where I went wrong. Did I overreact? Maybe. Was his tone really that bad? It felt like it at the time. It felt like he was destroying me, piece by piece. He was a bully. But then I think about all the lives that were disrupted, all the plans that were ruined, all because of me. No, not because of me. Because of him. He forced my hand. He pushed me to my limit. He was the one who created the hostile environment. I was just reacting. I was just trying to survive. They call it karma. I guess Miller's karma for being a terrible leader. My karma for what? For standing up for myself? For refusing to be a doormat? I don't know. All I know is I'm here, alone, watching my life slowly unravel. And they're all out there, probably still blaming me, still thinking I'm the villain. But they don't know the whole story. They never will. And I'm still the one suffering, stuck in this quiet hell, while they probably just moved on with their perfect lives. It's not fair. It's just not.